My topic is the long-forgotten XP practices, and my idea for the talk was not to talk about what people normally think about when they think about extreme programming. The first and most important thing that I would like you to get from this talk is for you to spend a couple of maybe minutes here, a couple of seconds, and imagine what you do at work. What do you do at work? And in the light of of your daily tasks, what is your definition of how do you define your professional responsibility? How do you define what are you responsible for? How do you understand your scope of what's being expected from you? Just try to think about this for a couple of seconds. Is this, when you're a programmer, it's probably easy to think, I'm responsible for writing a good code. Or if you're a product owner, you may think, I'm responsible for creating a backlog and maintaining a backlog and making sure it's, in a proper order, making sure it's prepared appropriately so that the team can work with it. If you are in a managerial position, you may think you're responsible for communicating, cooperating with your customers, with your partners. I lead a software house, so my perspective, my scope of responsibilities is probably a little different than my developers. But what's, I think, the most important is for everybody to have an understanding of what they can do. And especially during Agile conferences, there's a lot that's being talked about the responsibility, about empowering teams. A lot of people talk about giving teams, allowing teams for as much as possible so that they can self-organize. So now if you're thinking about your responsibilities, I'm sure there's a lot of things you have never thought about that is expected from you. Like, do you think that you're responsible also for the growth of other people on your team? Or that you're responsible for how they feel when they work with you on that team? That you're responsible for the success of the product which you participate in building, that you're also partially responsible for the success or the lack of success of your customers. So what I'm trying to convince my developers and my team about is that what we're really selling is not software. What we're selling is a full experience of cooperating with us. And now in the time where it's so easy to find a team in India or in any country that's cheaper than Poland, and people do make their decisions based on money, the more values which cannot be measured on a per hour basis, the more such values that you're able to give, the better for you and the better for your company, and the more valuable you are to your company. So from this perspective, I would like my developers and I would like people who work in my company to take as much responsibility as they can and make sure that they influence their products and projects that they are on the daily basis as much as possible. Because in the end, it's not me who's working with the customers on a daily basis. It's not me who knows what's happening on those projects. So the more I give them, the more the more valuable we are to our customers. And basically, why am I talking about this? Because this is what XP is really about. Extreme programming is obviously the extreme practices like test-driven development. Obviously, pair programming, continuous integration, which was not so popular 15 years ago when it was starting. Now it's pretty ubiquitous. And so this is what people think about when they hear extreme programming. But extreme programming is something completely different. Extreme programming, if we say that Scrum is not a method, Scrum is not a process, but Scrum is a framework, so something technical that you can use for conveying a project, I would say that extreme programming is a philosophy. It's because it's based on values. It is the actual practices that you're using are much less important than the philosophical, the values, the philosophical aspect, the values that are behind it. And if we go through those values, they're really not related that much to technology. They're not related to test first or working in pairs. The values are communication. So, are you at the same page with your customer? Are you at the same page with the whole team? And out of the values come the practices, like the whole team. So for the team is capable of performing all the tasks that are needed, right? And the whole team is responsible for performing those tasks. They need to organize, right? The fact that we want to have as good communication with the customer as possible, to understand their business values, to understand their risks, to understand what's really important for them. We want to have as much communication with the customer as possible. That's why initially there was a practice which was called customer on site, where XP teams were supposed to have a customer representative always with them. It's obviously hard to impossible if you're a remote team. Like in most projects we are remote, we have customers from other parts of the world, not in Poland. So we don't have customer on our side, but we are in a continuous, constant contact with them. So that was communication. The other thing is feedback. Extreme programming is based on feedback. Feedback from the smallest point, which is the discussion in a pair when you're developing, discussion about the code, discussion about the design, through daily stand-ups, through weekly iteration cycle and retrospectives and demo to the customer, through a monthly cycle to a 3 months release cycle. So there's a lot of layers of feedback because we want to introduce as much transparency as possible into the process. The third one is simplicity. And simplicity means basically two things. Again, we have the technical part of it, which is we don't want to over-engineer our solutions, because over-engineering always leads to limitation of the options. It leads to huge code bases and to limitation of what you can do with it. On the other hand, there is the soft side of it, the requirement side of it. We want to have the simplicity also on the requirement side. And while now I think it is probably due to Apple, it is a pretty common understanding that too many features is not something that users want. It probably wasn't so 15 years ago. If I think about software 15 years ago, think about Word in Microsoft Office, right? It has tons of functions. Nobody really knows what's inside. And now, if you look at the applications that you're using on a daily basis, like what you've got in your phones, they have just a couple of features. Like I think that probably the best example is Instagram, which just has probably like 2 or 3, right? So, and even though it's so useful and they're not really going towards adding new features one on top of another. So the real success, the real value is not in the amount of features, but to do the things that you're doing very well. And then there are these two values which are completely different than what we're talking about in Agile Manifesto. The first one is courage. Courage is extremely important in relationship in the relationship inside the team and outside of the team. And this is also something that's very deeply related to the responsibility and how you perceive your responsibility at work. I believe that a responsibility of my employees in my company is to give me feedback and to give feedback to each other with courage, understanding that their feedback may not be accepted, but because they believe something is important. If we believe something is important, our impact is much bigger. And one of the things, I was on the talk of Kuba Nabrodalik talking about the salaries and how they're measuring what people should earn at Fair Finance is they're trying to measure the impact that you're doing in your position, right? So courage is extremely important because otherwise, it means you don't care, right? It will if you don't have courage to say to your teammates that they are not engaged enough, if you don't have courage to tell to your customers that they are spending money, they're wasting their money, it's hard later on to ask for the same thing back, right? It's hard to ask for feedback, and it's hard to create something of real value. And the last thing is respect. Because when you're saying something straight to somebody, it's important to understand that we are human beings, so we have feelings, right? We need to be able to communicate. Teams are composed of human beings and not computers, right? Software development is something that people do, not computers do. So this is also something we need to take into account. And it's also related to the responsibility, to the respect that you have towards other people on your team, but also respect that you have towards your customers. One of the core principles of extreme programming is so-called mutual benefit. Mutual benefit means that any cooperation, whether we're talking on the team level or we're talking about, like in our company, we're working for a customer, it makes sense, the whole cooperation makes sense only if both sides benefit from it. So, and when I was thinking about it from the perspective of a company, of two companies working with each other, it's pretty easy, right? You've got a company that wants software and a company that writes software. One wants money of the other one wants the code of the first one, right? It seems to be pretty easy. But on the team level, that's much harder. Because on team level, we're really not exchanging services so easily. On the team level, if there's a nice feature that I would like to develop and there's somebody else who also would like to develop that feature because it's interesting, I may have a tendency of trying to take it over, right? To make sure I'm getting this one. So mutual benefit is also related to how you work with your employer. So you being the employees, how you're really spending time of your employer and how we as a company are spending time and money of our customers. So one of the practices that XP proposes is called Energized Work. At some point, initially, it was called 40-hour work week, but they have decided to change the name because there are countries which don't work 40 hours, and like in France, they couldn't understand why they should be now working 40 hours if their work code says 35 is the top they can have, right? So the Energized Work is an idea that when you're at work, you should be working. You've got these 8 hours that you should spend on delivering value because you're being paid for this. This is not your time anymore. This is time of the person who's paying you for your work, right? On the other hand, you have a complete right not to work overtime. You have a complete right to say, I have my life. There is something I would like to do other than bringing value to our customers, right? So it's also a perspective of responsibility. How do we perceive ourselves in our positions? How do we perceive ourselves in relation to our employers, in relation to our customers? The last thing I would like to talk about is the economy. Economy in extreme programming means that we want to do as much of value-bringing tasks, or the tasks that bring the most value at a given time as possible. I think this goes very close to the current lean startup movement. It's just that there's a little different background to it. When you are a startup, you're only trying to develop what's called minimum viable product, only something to verify that what you're doing is really valuable, right? If there are people willing to pay for it. So, and you want to organize your work in such a way that you will be getting return on investment as soon as possible. When you are working for a huge corporation, nobody's really paying attention to doing customer tests. Nobody's really checking if this, or very often nobody's checking if their new great idea is going to bring them any money, right? So I also think this is your responsibility as product owners on that project, even as developers, to bring in this perspective, to bring the perspective of, does a given feature make any sense? Does it really, at that point, is it really the most valuable thing we should be working on now? So if there's one thing that I would like you to take from this presentation, is for you to spend this couple of minutes, maybe Monday morning, or tomorrow, no, 2 days from now, when you get to work, try to spend a couple of minutes thinking, what forces do I have in my work? What impact can I make? Where is the responsibility that I'm currently taking, and what are the things that I can do at work? Because this is basically related to how you are being perceived by your employers, by your managers. This is how you're being perceived and how your careers will grow. Thank you very much.